swim, little mermaid. With your sword of truth, it's time to pierce the sky.
MKUltra and the Apollo moon landing. MKUltra was an illegal project undertaken by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, intended to develop procedures and drugs that could be used for brainwashing and the mental torture of humans. The exposure of MKUltra was triggered by the death of Frank Olson, who fell to his death from the 13th floor of a New York hotel on November 28, 1953, at around 2:30 in the morning. It was quickly ruled a suicide and the case was closed. We fast forward to 1973, when the CIA secretly ordered the destruction of all documentation related to MKUltra. The Presidential Commission, led by Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, from whom it gained the nickname the Rockefeller Commission, uncovered some of the CIA's MKUltra activities in 1975. That same year, the government admitted that the CIA had drugged Frank Olson with LSD without his knowledge, 9 days before his death. After the family of Frank Olson announced that they planned to sue the CIA over Olson's death, the government offered them a settlement, which was accepted by the family. They also received an apology from President Ford and then CIA Director William Colby. June 9, 1953, CIA approved Project MKUltra's subproject 8 on LSD. Signed by Sidney Gottlieb, S. Gottlieb, who signed the MKUltra document, stated in this Dutch news article that MKUltra began in the early 50s. It is worth noting that Project MKUltra, 1953 to 1973, was preceded by Project Artichoke, 1951, and Project Bluebird, 1950. All three projects were mind control projects. Rocket scientist Willy Ley, 62, dies. New York writer Willy Ley, the German-born rocket expert and writer of scientific articles about space travel, passed away on Tuesday, June 24, 1969, in New York from a heart attack. Ley was 62 years and was a good friend of Wernher von Braun. In 1935, he moved to the USA and was an advisor of NASA. Note that this is just 4 weeks before the Apollo 11 moon landing mission. Willy Ley was born in Berlin, Germany on October 2, 1906, and received a degree in journalism from the University of Königsberg. He became interested in space travel after reading Hermann Oberth's books on the subject. In 1926, Willy Ley published his first book, Die Fahrt ins Weltall, The Journey into Space. The next year, he helped found the German VFR, Society for Spaceship Travel. Over the next few years, he published several books promoting spaceflight while also editing the German VFR journal. When Wernher von Braun joined the society in 1931, Willy Ley was his first mentor. Woman in the Moon, the 1929 German film Die Frau am Mond, was the first realistic depiction of spaceflight in cinematic history. Although Hermann Oberth is often credited as the main technical consultant for the film, Willy Ley's role was of essential importance. As director Fritz Lang later recalled, the work Willy Ley had done as consultant and advisor was amazing. In 1935, Willy Ley left Germany and moved to the USA. Willy, a fanatic reader of science fiction, began publishing scientific articles in American science fiction magazines. His first story in the magazine, The Dawn of the Conquest of Space, was issued in March 1937. Meanwhile, in 1937 Germany, the Gestapo had confiscated all models of the spaceship and rocket from the film Die Frau im Mond, as well the trajectories around the Earth and to the Moon and back. Not only all models, but also all the calculations and drawings were taken.
Ja, und dabei haben mir zwei deutsche Wissenschaftler sehr geholfen. Willy Ley und Professor Obert. Und diese beiden Wissenschaftler, die haben mir ein Modell der Rakete gebaut und auch die Flugbahnen so genau gemacht, dass vor dem Zweiten Weltkrieg Gestapo unseligen Angedenkens sämtliche Kopien aus dem Verkehr zog.
Operation Paperclip. After the Second World War, Willy Ley would soon be reunited with his old friend Hermann Oberth and pupil Wernher von Braun, who were captured by the Americans in Germany in 1945 and brought illegally to the USA under Operation Paperclip. In 1949, Willy Ley published the book The Conquest of Space. The illustrations are made by the artist Chesley Bonestell. In 1949, before we ever knew what other planets actually looked like, Chesley Bonestell had some ideas. His work is credited as some of the best, as he inspired space enthusiasts for generations to come.
Chesley Bonestell was an artist who, with his paintbrush, with his paintings, was able to show an entire nation that the conquest of space was not only possible, but it was something that could happen within their own lifetimes.
I saw many of his paintings when I was a child, and they were the first visions I ever had of worlds away from Earth.
And his paintings helped inspire many people who were involved in the space field. Many engineers, people who were helping to get us to the moon one day. Practically all of them would have been able to tell you who Chesley Bonestell was.
Destination Moon. The 1950 film Destination Moon hired the artist Chesley Bonestell and consulted with numerous scientists, including Hermann Oberth and Wernher von Braun. The son of H.L. Gold, editor of Galaxy magazine, a popular science fiction magazine Willy Ley wrote for in those days, remembers why Willy Ley was canceled as advisor.
I've got a story, before we go take our break, I got a Willy Ley story. Willy Ley was the original science editor of Galaxy Easy, and I'd like this up on Galaxy Easy, this particular slug, please. Willy Ley was our science editor for a long time, about almost 10 years. And he came from the Verein für Raumschifffahrt, which was the German Rocket Society, and he worked with Wernher von Braun. And then he left Germany when Hitler came into, Willy did when he came into power, when Hitler came into power, and Wernher von Braun stayed in Germany to work on the rocket program. Well, Willy was hired for a movie called Destination Moon, made in 1950, about the first manned space flight to the moon, which science fiction authors had seen coming for years. It was one of the very first major budget science fiction films, and it was made in 1950. It was one of the very first. And so, so Willy was asked to be the technical advisor on the film. One of the first things he said is, he says, you can't have sound explosions in space because the sounds in space don't happen. There's nothing that will transmit this. You have to have an atmosphere in order to transmit sound waves. Sound waves don't transmit in space because space is a vacuum. So he was fired summarily, and Wernher von Braun was asked the same question: what can we do to make these explosions? He said, of course you can have sound in space. Go ahead and order this how you want in space. So he was hired. That's the story. Expediency rules.
The U.S. Navy was highly interested in the science fiction film Destination Moon. One of their officers was interviewed backstage and seemed very impressed. This is just like in 1937 when the Gestapo was interested in Willy Ley's work. During an interview on the Destination Moon film set, a U.S. Navy officer says, "When we first heard about the making of this film, we thought that it was one of those mad scientist, wicked woman routines. But we see that it is not that at all, and it is heartening that these kind of pictures are made."
Time left. There's another naval guest here I'd like to introduce. Lieutenant Rock.
Oh, yes, we did. How are you, Lieutenant? Lieutenant, are you a technical advisor or something on
Well,
this
no,
picture?
I'm not a technical advisor. When we
Navy's
first,
interested in rocketry.
Oh, I know they are.
we're doing a lot of rocket work out at White Sands, as you know, so this is of interest to us. When we first heard about it, we were afraid that maybe it was one of those mad scientists wicked women routines, but we see it isn't that at all, and it's heartening to see this sort of picture being made.
It's done an invaluable service.
During the early 1950s, we see the same German scientists, Hermann Oberth, Werner von Braun, and Willy Ley showing up. As we have already seen, they go back to 1931 Germany. Chesley Bonestell joined this group in 1949, followed by Walt Disney in 1955 with the series Man in Space. Why did the scientists Werner von Braun, Willy Ley, and Hermann Oberth need artists and science fiction filmmakers? The answer can be found in the 1966 German book about the life of Werner von Braun, 6 Tagen bis zum Mond, in 6 Days to the Moon, by Sean Hare. On page 124. It is 1949, and von Braun was brought to the USA under Operation Paperclip. He had just heard that his German rocket scientists would move from El Paso to Huntsville. It was at that point that he tried to get his book, Mars Project, published. However, one publisher after another declined his work as it was too unrealistic. At that point, von Braun understood that in order to realize his plans, he had to make the American public space-minded. The American people were bombarded with space propaganda. 1949, Willy Ley, Chesley Bonestell, Conquest of Space. 1950, Werner von Braun, Hermann Oberth, Chesley Bonestell, Film Destination Moon. 1950, Willy Ley, Werner von Braun, Chesley Bonestell, series Man Will Conquer Space Soon. 1952, Willy Ley, Werner von Braun, Chesley Bonestell, Man on the Moon. 1953, Willy Ley, Werner von Braun, Chesley Bonestell, series The Complete Book of Outer Space. 1953, Werner von Braun, Chesley Bonestell, A Mars Project. 1955, Willy Ley, Werner von Braun, Disney series Man in Space. This is just a small selection of what was published in those early days. You can be sure that the CIA was aware of von Braun's plans to make the American public space-minded. It would fit perfectly with what was at the time Project Bluebird, later Project Artichoke, and eventually MKUltra. Werner von Braun and his team were the perfect guinea pigs. A former Nazi group could be easily blamed if things went wrong. Without von Braun or his team being aware, the CIA began to play an invisible hand. Von Braun and his team must have felt that things were going really smoothly at times, as the CIA was carefully orchestrating things in the background. From 1949 onwards, the space propaganda machine took off. Von Braun and his team really started to believe that they could travel into space and land a man on the moon. Von Braun's vision to make the American people space-minded was now under the full control of MKUltra, and it started to work. By the early 1960s, the Americans, who had been bombarded with space propaganda for a whole decade, now demanded that the USA land a man on the moon and conquer space. President Kennedy was not informed or aware of MKUltra when on September 12, 1962, he spoke the words, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." In 1963, he was still not aware of Project MKUltra when he proposed a joint landing on the moon and ordered the CIA to share data with the Soviets. 10 days later, Kennedy was killed. The CIA could not expose Project MKUltra without becoming the laughingstock of the world.
But to the CIA, Kennedy's letter may also contain a second, greater threat.
This document also goes on to talk about a program of cooperation with the Soviet Union in space. It essentially instructs the CIA to initiate a data-sharing program with the Soviet Union.
The request follows a speech Kennedy gave at the UN, where he even suggests that he will collaborate with the Russians on the biggest prize in space, a manned mission to the moon.
In the field of space, there is room for new cooperation. Kennedy was actually interested in starting up a joint program between the Soviets and the U.S. to combine our efforts to try and get to the lunar surface.
I include among these possibilities a joint expedition to the moon.
Some authors and historians suggest that the CIA was infuriated by Kennedy's repeated attempts to cooperate with America's Cold War enemy.
This is a period of extreme tension between the superpowers. The theory was that he was killed by the CIA, who feared that he was going soft on the Soviet threat.
During the Apollo 1 fire in 1967, which resulted in the death of 3 astronauts, it must have started to become clear to von Braun that there were problems beyond fixing. But the CIA, MKUltra, kept feeding the public positive data and information. The CIA wanted to see if they could brainwash the whole world into believing that they landed a man on the moon. During von Braun's interview on March 22, 1968, at the campus of Ball State University, you can see that he has doubts that they would achieve the goal of landing a man on the moon before 1970.
Well, there's undoubtedly a prestige element involved in being the first on the moon, but I think the real significant thing about the Apollo program, our lunar landing program, is that it serves as a focusing point for a vast scientific and technological effort that could never have been mounted and conducted with this kind of determination had it not been for a firm target in space and time. In other words, you cannot have a hard-hitting program when you don't have a clear objective, like let's land a man on the moon in this decade. If you say just let's go out into space and see whether we find it interesting, you spend most of your time arguing with other people what the more important things are, and you don't get a job done. You also don't get congressional support for this kind of a thing. And so it is really the byproducts of the Apollo program that are more important than a timely landing on the moon itself.
A few months later, in December 1968, Apollo 8 became the second manned Apollo flight ever, and it was the first time that humans would go beyond low Earth orbit. They would orbit the moon and return to Earth. It seems that the CIA MKUltra was in a hurry for some reason. They watched closely to see if the world would believe it. We know the answer: they did. Apollo 10 was the second lunar orbit mission and flight beyond low Earth orbit. Again, the world believed it. MKUltra was ready for the big one. They would broadcast the Apollo 11 moon landing live on TV. The world watched in awe, and they believed it. A week after the success of Apollo 11, the CIA set up a test for the media. They informed a group of journalists, who had been invited by NASA JPL, that the Apollo 11 moon landings were faked and filmed on a soundstage in the Nevada desert. CBS News science advisor R.C. Hoagland recalls something that happened to him days after Apollo 11 had returned.
Do you know where I first ran into this story, Wayne? When I was with CBS, with the network, and had carte blanche to go anywhere in NASA, and they actually liked me. Mm-hmm. I went from Rockwell, where we had built a whole solar system to walk people through during the Apollo 11 landing. And a few days later, we put everything together, hundreds and hundreds of tons of gear, and went up to JPL in Pasadena. I walked in the door, and one of the PR people for JPL was squiring around a guy who was handing out leaflets claiming that the Apollo 11 experience, which was a week and a half old, never happened. It was a fake in a hangar somewhere in Nevada. That is how old this story is, and why he was being given red carpet treatment by NASA personnel themselves is a mystery that I now look back on and say, why the hell didn't I ask that question then?
After Apollo 11, 5 more Apollo missions claimed to have landed a man on the moon. From 1972 onwards, humans never left low Earth orbit again. In the beginning of the 1970s, the CIA gave orders to secretly destroy all MKUltra-related documents. In 1975, only a few documents were recovered by the Rockefeller Commission. At around the same time, all documentation relating to the Apollo project were destroyed. As explained by NASA Administrator Mike Griffin somewhere in 2007.
Although you would be amazed at the number of times I get questions from top-level policymakers concerning why don't we just haul some of that Apollo equipment out of the barn and head back. And of course the answer is there is no barn. We will spend the next 10 years recreating a lot of capability for spaceflight, hopefully going a little beyond, but we will spend the next 10 years recreating capabilities that this nation once had and threw away proactively and with malice aforethought during the Nixon administration. I regarded it as a mistake then. I see that there are a few of you who, like me, are old enough to remember the Nixon administration.
The perfect overlap. MKUltra 1950 to 1973. Von Braun's plan to make the American people space-minded took place at around the same time Project Bluebird started in 1950 and ended in 1972. The CIA was involved in both projects. Both projects have destroyed or lost most of their data and documentation. The CIA wanted to see if they could brainwash the world into believing that they had landed a man on the moon. Von Braun and his team of German paperclip scientists were used because they could easily be pointed out and blamed if the project went wrong. Von Braun and his team were never aware of the invisible hand of the CIA. By convincing the world that Apollo landed a man on the moon, the MKUltra project is the greatest CIA success story to date. The MKUltra project ended 50 years ago, 1973, but many people today still believe that Apollo landed a man on the moon. After all these years, they are still under the influence of MKUltra, without them understanding it. Willy Ley died of a heart attack just 4 weeks before Apollo 11. Was his death a warning to the other Germans? He escaped the Gestapo in Nazi Germany, but was powerless against the invisible hand called MKUltra. He was von Braun's friend and first teacher in rocketry back in 1931. Would he expose the fake Apollo moon landings? Willy Ley definitely had the network and credentials to do so. More than 54 years have passed since Apollo 11, and the space programs are still in low Earth orbit. For the Apollo moon landing believers, I have a question. When will you start to question the Apollo moon landings? After 55 years, 60 years, 75 years, or never?
right up and look 'em in the eye, so swim, little mermaid, with the sword of truth, that's time to pierce the sky. With the sword of truth, that's time to pierce the sky. With the sword of truth, it's time to pierce the sky.
Okay, guys, what do we got left to do out here? Day looks clean. Day looks clean. Day looks clean.